everyone, Chief Rankings Officer Payton Soicher here on the Triple Option with Paul Catalina. We had a crazy Week 14 of college football. Rivalry weekend was in full effect. All of the flags have been planted at center field. All of the teams now have their bragging rights. We had crazy upsets at the top. We had really complicated scenarios now at the bottom. But now that all of the games have finished, where do we think the Tuesday rankings release from the playoff committee is going to leave all of the teams? Let's dive in right now and look at where the Big Ten and the SEC stand in those top 12 ranked teams to see where we might see any complications. So here we are. Let's go ahead, and here is the projected Week 15 rankings from rankingsrightnow.com. You can go ahead and go into rankingsrightnow.com, create yourself a free login, and play around with the what if simulation tool. But as of right now, this is where the machine learning algorithm, which is trained on prior voting from the playoff committee, has all of the teams. The biggest question up top is, where will Ohio State drop to? Now, Ohio State had a terrible loss against Michigan at home in Columbus. No one saw that coming. They were a 20-point favorite going into the game. Does that drop them below teams like Notre Dame and Penn State? Ohio State already has a win over Penn State this year. So are they going to honor that win? I could see Notre Dame and Ohio State flipping right here, but that's where the questions start to arise. Does Penn State move ahead of Ohio State? Penn State's only lost one game this year. Ohio State has only lost, Penn State's lost one game this year. Ohio State's lost two, but one of them was the number one Oregon. They definitely have a much tougher schedule. So it'll be very interesting to see where the playoff committee has all of those different teams for that 3 through 6 range, right? Do they go below Georgia? All these different questions that are so interesting about who will have that home field advantage going into the playoffs. So as of right now, the algorithm has them at 3. I personally think the algorithm is wrong on this one. I would have them a little bit lower. But if we take a look at the Big Ten, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, there is no real reason to believe that any of those teams will drop out of the top 12 after Championship Saturday. Oregon and Penn State are going to play for the Big Ten championship. Even if Oregon loses, they're going to drop down maybe 1 or 2 or 3 spots. If Penn State loses, they're not going to drop out of the top 12, I don't think. So now you have Indiana, Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State that will all be included in that top 12. Where things get complicated is when you start to look at the SEC. Right now, the loss for Miami opens things up for teams like South Carolina and Alabama. Why did South Carolina jump teams like Ole Miss and Alabama? Well, it's because they played a tougher opponent. They beat Clemson. Clemson is now projected to fall all the way down to 17. So there is one last spot for South Carolina and Alabama right now, right? Clemson and SMU are playing in the championship game for the ACC. If Clemson beats SMU, there is going to be an enormous question for the playoff committee of, do you move Clemson into an outright 12? Or are they still on the outside? Does SMU stay in the top 12? But if SMU wants to stay in the top 12, or if the playoff committee, I should say, wants to keep SMU in the top 12, that means that someone down here is going to have to get sacrificed for it. So, does South Carolina or Alabama have an outside chance of getting in? The odds do not look good right now. They need Clemson to lose just to be still relevant in the conversation. If Miami moves up to 11 and South Carolina is 12 or 13, that's going to be almost a death sentence to them. Right now, we have to really figure out where South Carolina and Alabama and Miami fit into all of this. The playoff committee is going to give that Tuesday rankings release, and that is going to essentially say whoever is higher between Alabama and South Carolina, who has the chance of getting in. Whoever is the lesser of the two will be kicked out. And so therefore, we're only looking at Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee as the only 3 teams in the SEC. If we go back a couple weeks ago, it was like 5 or 6 teams in the top 10 that were SEC dominant. We're now only looking at 3 teams that are going to make out of the top 12, which I think is a huge surprise to everybody. So stay with us all week on the Triple Option with Paul Catalina with 365 Sports. We're going to be going through all of the different rankings, all of the different projections going into Championship Saturday, what this means for everybody, who's in, who's out. There is so much to discuss going into the final weekend of not regular season play, of college football play before we finally have our answers of what the playoff is going to look like. I'm Chief Rankings Officer Payton Soicher on the Triple Option with Paul Catalina.